The evening was perfect. Harbor Bay's marina glimmered under string lights. A warm summer breeze carried the faint smell of salt and grilled fish, and Serena Vale looked like something Miles Corbin hadn't let himself believe in for a very long time. They'd been laughing for 2 hours straight, easy, unforced, the kind of laughter that makes you forget you ever knew how to be guarded. Then she set down her glass. Her eyes shifted, and in a voice just above a whisper she said, "You can leave."
I'm a single mom.
The table went quiet. If that kind of story stays with you, the ones about real people choosing each other in the middle of real life, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from. Miles Corbin was 37 years old and hadn't been on a date in over a year. That wasn't self-pity, it was just the math of his life. Between the 6 a.m. shift starts at Bayfront Logistics, the bi-weekly custody exchanges, and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into a man's bones after a divorce that nobody saw coming, but everybody in hindsight should have. There hadn't been room for much else. He managed port operations for a mid-size freight company on the edge of Harbor Bay, coordinating cargo schedules and dispatcher routes with the kind of quiet competence that made his bosses trust him and his coworkers forget he was there. He was good at his job. He was less good at everything that happened after 5 o'clock. His marriage to Kara had ended 2 years prior. Not loudly. That was the thing people never understood when he tried to explain. Yet there was no single explosion, no discovered secret, no villain. Just two people who had slowly stopped finding their way back to each other. Until one morning, they both woke up and the distance between them felt more honest than anything they'd said in months. Kara wasn't cruel. Miles wasn't absent. They were just finished. And they'd both known it long before either of them said so out loud. What remained was Aubrey. 8 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with sea turtles and strawberry ice cream, and a worn-out stuffed rabbit named Captain. Aubrey split her time between her mother's house in Cloverfield and Miles's apartment 2 towns over. And every time he drove her back after a weekend together, he sat in his car for a few minutes in the parking lot of his building before going upstairs. Not because he was falling apart, just because the quiet after she left was a different kind of quiet than all the other quiets, and it needed a moment to settle. He hadn't been looking for anyone. That part was true. Serena Vale had heard the word resilient so many times, she'd started to hate it. People said it the way they said strong or incredible, with a kind of admiration that was really just relief that her problems were hers and not theirs. She was 34, worked as a patient records coordinator at Coastal Mercy Clinic, and was the sole parent of 2 children. Mira, 9, sharp-eyed and serious, who drew sea creatures in the margins of her homework and had strong opinions about which clouds looked like animals. And Nolan, 5, who collected smooth rocks, spoke in a half-whisper, and had recently become convinced that something lived under the bathroom sink. Their father, Adrian, had left when Nolan was not yet 2. It hadn't happened all at once. That was what Serena had never quite found the words to explain. It wasn't a door slamming, it was a door closing by degrees. Phone calls that got shorter, visits that got further apart. Promises made on Sunday that dissolved by Wednesday. Adrian wasn't a monster. He was something harder to explain to children. A man who loved them in the abstract, but found the reality heavier than he'd expected, and who one day decided that lightness suited him better. He still called on birthdays. He still sent cards at Christmas with checks that sometimes cleared, but Mira had stopped running to the window when she heard a car in the driveway. And Nolan, who had no memory of a time when his father was consistently present, had simply organized his world without that space in it. Serena had learned to do the same. She was not bitter exactly. She had moved past bitter the way you move past a town on a long drive. You see it, you note it, and then it's behind you. What she carried instead was something quieter and more durable. A low, steady certainty that men who seemed solid had a tendency to become optional, and that the only reliable thing was the work of her own hands. She was good at her job. She was fiercely devoted to her children.
She had a small bungalow on Blue Heron Lane with a porch that needed repainting and a backyard where the kids could run until dark. She wasn't unhappy. She just wasn't expecting anything. They met at Sunbeam Roasters, a coffee counter near the harbor that smelled like toasted coconut and salt air.
Serena had rushed in between appointments, ordered 2 iced peach teas, and then reached into her bag to find that she'd left her wallet in her car 4 blocks away, with exactly 90 seconds before her break ended. The man behind her paid without making it a thing.
No grand gesture, no waiting for gratitude. He handed the cashier the cash, took his coffee, and stepped aside.
When she turned to say something, he gave a small shrug. "It's $4. Don't worry about it."
His name was Miles.
She found that out 3 days later when they ended up at the same cluster of outdoor tables during their lunch breaks, and the conversation moved from the coffee to the heat to the fact that they both worked within 6 blocks of each other and had somehow never crossed paths. Then it moved further. It kept moving. By the end of the 3rd week, Miles had asked her to dinner. She said yes before she could talk herself out of it.
Marina and Mint was the kind of restaurant that made Harbor Bay feel like it was trying to be somewhere better than itself, in the best possible way. Outdoor tables lined a wide deck overlooking the marina, strung with warm Edison lights that caught the surface of the water below. The menu was written on a chalkboard. The music was low and acoustic, and came from a single speaker mounted near the kitchen door. It was the kind of place that felt effortless, without actually being effortless. And on a Thursday evening in late June, with the last of the daylight still sitting pink on the horizon, it was nearly impossible not to feel like something good was about to happen. Miles arrived early. He'd spent more time than he'd admit choosing between 2 shirts, and had ultimately gone with neither, landing on a simple white linen that felt less like a performance. Small detail, but it steadied him. Serena arrived, and he stopped thinking about the shirt entirely. She was wearing a pale linen dress, her hair down, and she moved through the restaurant the way she did most things, with a composure that looked natural, but that Miles was beginning to suspect took considerable effort to maintain. She smiled when she saw him, not the polite smile from Sunbeam Roasters, something warmer, something she hadn't entirely decided to give. They talked for 2 hours before the food arrived. That was the thing he kept returning to afterward, how easy it was. Not the performed ease of 2 people trying to make a good impression, but something more disarming than that. They talked about their jobs, and somewhere in the middle of a conversation about logistics software, they ended up talking about the particular loneliness of being competent at work while quietly falling apart at home. They talked about summers, the ones they'd planned and never taken, the ones their kids had loved. The one Miles had spent driving Aubrey to every beach within an hour of Harbor Bay, because she'd become convinced she was going to find a sea turtle nest, and he hadn't had the heart to tell her the odds. Serena laughed at that, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that changes a face entirely. They talked about the divorce. Not heavily, not as confession, but as context. Miles said that he and Kara had simply run out of road, and Serena nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what that topography felt like. She didn't press. He didn't press. They let things breathe. By the time the entrees were cleared, Miles felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, present. Not managing the evening, not calculating how it was going. Just there, at a table by the water, with a woman who made the air feel different. Then the dessert menus arrived, and something shifted. He noticed it first in her hands. She set down her water glass and placed both palms flat on the table, the way a person does when they're steadying themselves for something. Her eyes dropped. The warmth that had been in her face all evening didn't disappear. It dimmed, the way a lamp dims when the voltage drops. Miles waited. When she looked up, there was something unflinching in her expression. Not cold, but braced, like she was preparing to absorb impact rather than deliver it. "I should have said this earlier," she started. Her voice was steady, practiced in the way things become practiced when you've said them enough times to stop flinching. "I have 2 kids. Mira's 9, Nolan's 5. A brief pause. Their dad isn't in the picture. Not really. Miles didn't say anything. He let her finish. I've done this before, she said. Sat across from someone who seemed worth trusting, and I've watched them do the math. She looked at him directly. You can leave. I mean that. No hard feelings, no weirdness. I'd rather you go now than 6 months from now when my kids already know your name. The table was quiet. Somewhere behind them a couple laughed at something. The music shifted to a slower song. Miles looked at her for a moment, not calculating, not performing patience, just looking the way you look at something when you're deciding whether to say the true thing or the easy thing, and you've already decided. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I have a daughter, Aubrey. She's 8. Serena went still. Her mom and I split 2 years ago. Miles continued, his voice even. I see Aubrey every other weekend and some holidays if the schedule holds, which it doesn't always. I drive her back to her mom's on Sunday nights, and I sit in my parking lot for a few minutes before I go upstairs. He paused. I'm not telling you that so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I know what you just described. I know what it costs to say it. Something moved across Serena's face. A loosening, small and involuntary, like a door that's been held shut, finally being allowed to rest against its frame without the latch engaged. She had said those words you can leave to 3 men before Miles. The first had gone quiet and changed the subject before asking for the check. The second had said all the right things and stopped texting within 2 weeks. The third had been kind about it, which was almost worse, because kindness without follow-through is its own kind of abandonment. None of them had answered the way Miles just had. Not with reassurance, not with enthusiasm, with recognition. She picked up her water glass. Her hands had steadied. Tell me about Aubrey, she said, and he did. And she listened. And by the time they finally left Marina and Mint, the string lights had come on fully, and the water below the deck was dark, and the summer night had gone soft and warm around them, and neither of them was pretending anymore. The weeks after Marina and Mint had a particular quality to them, unhurried, almost careful, like 2 people who had found something fragile and were moving around it with deliberate attention. They settled into a rhythm without formally deciding to. Lunch breaks at the outdoor tables near the harbor, where the shade from the umbrella barely held against the afternoon heat. But neither of them moved inside. Evening walks along the boardwalk after their kids were down for the night. Shoes off, salt air, heavy and warm. Text messages that started as logistical. Running late, can you push by 15? And gradually became something else. The kind of back and forth that runs long past midnight without either person noticing the time. Miles looked forward to it in a way that surprised him. Not the giddy, unsettled anticipation he remembered from being young, but something quieter and more considered. The way you look forward to a place you've been before and found good. But something was off. It took him a few weeks to name it, and once he named it, he couldn't unname it. Serena let him in on one side of herself with remarkable ease. Her humor, her frustrations at work, her opinions, the way she talked about Mira's drawings or Nolan's rock collection with an affection so complete it had no performance in it. She gave him that, freely, without hesitation. What she didn't give him was the rest. She never invited him to Blue Heron Lane. She never mentioned the kids in real time, only in the past tense as finished scenes. Nolan did the funniest thing this morning. Or, Mira's been impossible about this art competition. Never come see, never be here. Their entire relationship existed in the clean, well-lit spaces between her real life, the marina, the boardwalk, the coffee counter. And it began to feel to Miles like he was being shown a curated exhibit rather than a home. He understood it. He did. He had watched her face when she said you can leave at the restaurant, had heard what was underneath that sentence. and he knew that what she was doing now was the same instinct operating by different means. If she never let him in, he could never leave in a way that cost her anything. But understanding a thing and being unmoved by it were not the same. One evening in mid-July, after a walk that had gone quiet in a way that felt heavier than comfortable, Miles stopped near the end of the boardwalk. The sun was low, burning orange across the water. Somewhere down the beach, a kid was flying a kite that kept diving and recovering, diving and recovering. "I want to meet them," he said. Serena looked at him. "Mira and Nolan," he said. "I want to meet your kids." She didn't answer right away. She turned back toward the water, and he let her. A shrimp boat moved slowly across the horizon, its lights just beginning to show in the early dusk. "Why?" she finally asked. Not defensively, like she actually wanted to understand his reasoning. "Because I'm in this," Miles said. "Not in the marina version of this, the actual version." He paused. "I don't want to keep meeting you halfway and calling it close." The silence stretched. The kite down the beach finally caught the wind properly and climbed. "I'm scared," she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely unadorned. No softening, no framing, just the bare statement of it. "I know," he said. "You don't know all of it." "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment. Then slowly she began. She was scared that he'd meet Mira and Nolan and find the real arithmetic of her life too complicated. But underneath that was the fear she didn't say, as quickly she was scared her children would like him. She was scared Mira would start saving her drawings to show him. She was scared Nolan would start asking when Miles was coming over. Because she had watched what happened when someone a child had begun to count on quietly recalculated and withdrew. Mira had not cried. That was worse. She had just gone still and resumed drawing, and never mentioned the man's name again. "If you meet them," Serena said, "and then you decide this is too much, it's not just me you leave. You understand that?" "Yes," Miles said. "Adrian didn't disappear overnight," she said. "He just showed up less and less, until one day Mira stopped expecting him, and I had to pretend that was normal." She pressed her lips together. "I will not do that to them again." Miles was quiet for a moment. He didn't try to counter it or reassure her past it. He sat with it the way it deserved to be sat with. "I can't promise you I'll be perfect," he said finally. "I can't promise things won't get complicated, because they already are, and we both know it. But I can promise you this. I won't show up in your kids' lives and then disappear because things got hard." He looked at her. "That's not a small promise. I know it's not. But it's the one I can actually keep." Serena looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that is trying to find the seam in something, the place where the surface doesn't match what's underneath. She didn't find one. "Saturday," she said. "Dinner at the house. But just as a friend. I'm not ready to explain. I'm not ready for more than that yet." "Saturday," Miles agreed. She nodded once, like a decision had been formally registered, and she was done deliberating. Then she started walking back toward the parking lot, and Miles fell into step beside her. And neither of them said much after that. But the quiet was different this time. Not the heavy silence from earlier in the walk, or the careful quiet of the weeks before. It was the quiet of two people who have said the true things, and are now simply walking in the same direction. Above them, the kite had climbed higher than it had all evening, pulling steadily against the line, staying up. The bungalow on Blue Heron Lane was the kind of house that showed you everything immediately. Miles pulled up at 6:30 on Saturday evening and sat in his truck for a moment before getting out. Not hesitating, just taking it in. The house was small, and sun-faded white paint gone slightly chalky from years of coastal summers. A front porch with two mismatched chairs and a wind chime that had lost a few of its tubes. The fence along the front yard had weathered to silver gray, leaning slightly in the way old fences do. Not broken, but no longer perfectly vertical. A pair of flip-flops, child-sized, one pink, one purple, belonging to different pairs, sat on the porch steps. A beach towel hung over the railing, still damp. From somewhere inside came the low pulse of a box fan. He grabbed the watermelon he'd bought from the farm stand on Route 9 and got out of the truck. Serena met him at the door before he knocked. She was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and cut-off jeans, her hair pulled up in a knot with a few pieces loose around her face. No earrings, no carefully chosen outfit. She looked exactly like a woman who had spent the day managing 2 children in July heat and had approximately 40 seconds to prepare herself for this moment. She looked more like herself than she ever had. "They know you're a friend from work," she said quietly, stepping back to let him in. "Mira's going to ask you questions. Just answer them normally. Don't try too hard." "Okay," Miles said. "Nolan might not talk to you at all." "That's fine." She looked at the watermelon. Something in her face went briefly soft before she recovered it. "You didn't have to do that." "It's 100 degrees," he said. "It's basically a medical necessity." She almost smiled. Then she stepped aside and let him in. The inside of the house hit him all at once, not unpleasantly, but completely. The living room fan was running on high and still losing the battle against the heat. A plastic cup of orange juice, half finished, sat on the coffee table beside a library book with a seahorse on the cover. 3 couch cushions were on the floor, arranged into what had clearly been a fort at some earlier point in the day and never fully disassembled. A laundry basket sat on the armchair, filled with clean clothes that hadn't been folded yet. The kitchen, visible through a wide-open doorway, had a pot on the stove, and the particular organized chaos of someone who had been cooking while simultaneously doing 6 other things. It smelled like garlic and sunscreen, and the specific warm fabric smell of a house where children actually live. Mira was at the kitchen table when Miles came in, working on something in a sketchbook with a concentration that suggested she was not going to look up until she was ready. She was 9 years old and had her mother's composure and her own particular version of it. Where Serena's was trained and maintained, Mira's was simply native. The natural gravity of a child who had learned early that watching carefully cost nothing and told you everything. She looked up when Miles set the watermelon on the counter. Her eyes moved from the watermelon to Miles, with the measured assessment of someone considerably older than 9. "Are you the one who paid for my mom's coffee?" she asked. Miles glanced at Serena, who gave him a look that said, "I have no idea how she knows that." "Yeah," he said, "that was me." Mira considered this. "She talks about it like it was a big deal." "It was $4, Miles said. "That's what she says, too." Mira returned to her sketchbook. Apparently, he had passed something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. Nolan was not in the kitchen. Serena nodded almost imperceptibly toward the hallway, and Miles glanced over to find a small face peering around the doorframe, dark eyes a smear of something orange near his mouth, one hand gripping the wall. When Miles looked at him directly, the face disappeared. Miles turned back to the counter and started cutting the watermelon without comment. Dinner was loud and non-linear in the way that meals with young children always are. Nolan knocked over his cup of lemonade within the first 4 minutes, and the resulting scramble, Serena lunging for the dish towel, Mira pulling her sketchbook clear of the spreading puddle, Nolan's face cycling through horror and pre-cry, was resolved quickly and without lasting drama. But it set the tone. The meal existed in a series of interruptions. Mira wanted to explain the art competition at her summer program in considerable detail, including the judging criteria, the categories, and her strategic reasons for choosing watercolor over colored pencil. And she addressed all of this primarily to Miles, with the intensity of someone presenting to a review board. Serena moved constantly, up for napkins, up to refill Nolan's cup, up to find the bottle of dressing Mira had suddenly decided she needed. Back down, up again, eating her own food, in disconnected bites between tasks.
Miles noticed she hadn't finished half of it. He didn't try to take over. He didn't perform helpfulness like a man auditioning. When Mira paused for breath, he asked a genuine question about the watercolor technique she was describing, and she looked momentarily startled, not expecting to be taken seriously, before launching back in with increased detail. When Nolan crept back to the table after the lemonade crisis and climbed into his chair, Miles didn't make eye contact or push conversation. He just passed the watermelon slices and let the kid decide when he was ready. Nolan ate 3 pieces of watermelon and said nothing directly to Miles for the duration of dinner. When Serena finally got up to start clearing plates, Miles stood and began stacking dishes before she could tell him where anything went. "You don't have to. I know," he said simply, and carried the stack to the sink. Serena took the kids to get washed up and ready for bed. Miles stayed in the kitchen. The window above the sink faced the backyard, where the last blue light of the summer evening was fading out over the grass. He could hear Serena's voice from down the hall, patient, low, the specific register of a parent winding children down, and the intermittent sounds of negotiation that preceded most bedtimes. He washed the dishes. He wiped down the stove. He found a dish towel on the handle of the oven and used it to dry his hands, and then draped it back where it had been. The kitchen was small and still warm from cooking, the overhead light casting everything yellow, and Miles stood in it for a moment after he'd finished, just quiet. He thought about his apartment on Sunday nights after he dropped Aubrey off. The particular silence of a space that had recently held something alive and now held only its absence. He thought about the folded dish towel and the half-eaten plates and the watermelon rinds and the sketchbook pulled to safety from the spreading lemonade, and something settled in him that had been slightly unsettled for a very long time. He was still standing there when Serena came back. She stopped in the doorway, took in the clean counters, the stacked dishes, the wiped stove. Her expression moved through something he couldn't fully read. Surprise first, and then something more complicated. Something that had the texture of grief mixed with relief. The way a person looks when they receive something they had stopped believing was available to them. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "You said that about the watermelon, too," Miles said. She looked at him. Her eyes were tired and unguarded and fully present in a way they hadn't been all evening. "I know," she said. I'm not used to it." She didn't move from the doorway right away. The kitchen fan hummed. Somewhere down the hall, Nolan called out once, "Mom," and then went quiet again. Serena stayed where she was, one hand resting on the door frame, looking at the clean kitchen with an expression Miles wasn't going to try to categorize. He leaned against the counter and waited. "This is what it actually looks like," she said finally. Her voice was measured, but something underneath it had shifted, a weight she was choosing to put down rather than carry past this room. Not the boardwalk. Not Marina and Mint. She gestured with one hand, a small encompassing motion that took in the whole house, the fan, the folded laundry in the next room, all of it. This. Every night. "I know," Miles said. "You've seen one dinner." "I know that too." She pushed off from the doorframe and moved to the table, pulling out a chair but not sitting, just standing behind it, both hands on the back of it like she needed something to hold. "The AC unit in the bedroom window broke in June, and I haven't had the money to replace it yet, so we've been sleeping with fans since the 4th of July. She said it plainly, without apology or embarrassment, the way you state a fact you've already made peace with. "Mira needs new shoes for fall, and no one's got a dentist appointment next month that I haven't figured out how to cover yet. My car makes a noise on left turns that I've been ignoring for 2 months because I can't think about it right now." Miles didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy," she said. "I'm telling you because you cleaned my kitchen, And you were kind to my kids, and part of me wanted to let myself—" She stopped. Started again. "I've done this before. Let myself start to trust something. And I know how it ends, Miles. Not because I'm pessimistic, because I have evidence." The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly on Blue Heron Lane, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen window. "Adrian wasn't a bad man," she continued. "He just did the math and found an easier answer. And the thing is, I understood it. 2 kids, no money, no space, no time. I get why someone looks at that and chooses something else." She looked at Miles directly. "You have a daughter. You have your own life with its own weight. You don't need to take on mine." "Serena, I'm giving you the exit," she said quietly. "That's what I'm doing. The clean version of it right now, before anything gets harder to undo." The room was very still. Miles straightened from the counter. He didn't move toward her, just stood fully upright, and when he spoke, his voice was unhurried. "I had a house," he said, "before the divorce. Good neighborhood, right school district, everything in its place. And it still fell apart, because looking right isn't the same as being right." He paused. "I spent a long time after that thinking the problem was something about me, something I'd missed, something I should have fixed sooner. But eventually I realized I was carrying blame that wasn't entirely mine to carry, and it was easier than accepting that sometimes things just don't make it." Serena was watching him. "I'm not looking for easy," he said. "Easy doesn't mean anything to me anymore. I want something real." He glanced around the kitchen briefly, the yellow light, the dish towel, the hum of the fan, and then back at her. "This is the realest room I've been in years." Serena's hands tightened slightly on the back of the chair. "I'm not going to pretend I have everything figured out," Miles continued. "But I know I'm not standing here calculating an exit. I'm not Adrian. I'm not the guy who stops texting after 2 weeks. I'm a man who sat in a parking lot last Sunday for 10 minutes, because dropping his daughter off never gets easier, and I'm still showing up every time." He looked at her steadily. "That's who I am." She looked at him for a long moment, the same searching look from the boardwalk, trying to find the seam where the surface didn't match what was underneath. She didn't find one. But finding nothing wasn't the same as being ready to believe. She had been in this moment before. Not in this kitchen, not with this man, but in this exact place of almost. And she knew what almost had cost her. "I want to believe you," she said. The honesty of it was quiet and complete. "I just don't know if I can afford to be wrong again." "I know," Miles said. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm just asking you not to hand me an exit I don't want." The fan moved the warm air around the kitchen. Down the hall, the house had gone fully quiet, both kids under the particular settled silence of a home after children's sleep. Serena let go of the chair. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but the way a person holds something carefully inside themselves. "Okay," she said. Small word, significant weight. Miles nodded once. Neither of them reached for anything more than that. They stood in the warm kitchen under the yellow light, and the evening didn't resolve into anything dramatic or declarative. It just held steady and honest and slightly uncertain, the way most real things do. The days after Blue Heron Lane moved differently. Not faster, not slower. Differently. Like the air had changed pressure, and everything moving through it carried a little more weight. Miles noticed it in the way Serena texted him now, less frequently, but longer. Less, "Here's a funny thing that happened," and more, "I've been thinking about something." She was processing. He could feel it across the distance of a phone screen, the careful way she was turning something over before trusting it with her full weight. He gave her the space. Not because he was pulling back,
but because he understood that what she was doing couldn't be rushed by reassurance. 2 weeks after the Saturday dinner, on a Wednesday evening when both their kids were squared away and the summer heat had finally broken enough to make the back porch bearable, Serena called instead of texting. Miles was sitting on his apartment balcony with the tail end of a work report he'd been ignoring, and when her name appeared on his screen, he set the report down and didn't look at it again. They talked for a long time. It started with the ordinary currency of their evenings, Mira's art competition, a difficult patient case Serena had been navigating at the clinic, the noise Miles's truck had started making that he was also ignoring. But somewhere around the second hour, the conversation slipped into something deeper, the way water finds a lower level naturally without drama. Serena talked about Adrian. Not the summary version, the real one. She talked about the specific texture of watching someone leave, incrementally, how it was in some ways harder than a clean break, because it denied you the clear moment of loss. There was no single night she could point to and say, that was when it ended. There was only the slow accumulation of evidence. The Sunday he was supposed to take the kids, and called at noon to say he was running behind, then didn't come at all. The Christmas card with a check that told her precisely, and without words, how much her children's year had been worth to him. The voicemail he left on Mira's birthday that was 40 seconds long and mentioned the wrong grade she was in. She noticed, Serena said. Mira. She didn't say anything. She just listened to it and handed the phone back to me and asked if we could have cake now. Miles was quiet. She was 7, Serena said. The porch was dark around him. Somewhere below, a neighbor was watering something, the hiss of a garden hose just audible over the cicadas. Miles held the phone and let her words settle into the evening, without rushing to cover them with anything. After that, I stopped waiting for him to become someone different, Serena continued, and that was right. But I think I also stopped letting myself expect anything from anyone, and I told myself that was strength. A pause. I'm not sure it was. What do you think it was? Miles asked. She considered that. Protection, she said. Which isn't the same thing. Miles leaned back in his chair. Above him the sky had gone deep blue, with a handful of stars visible between the clouds. He thought about how to say what he wanted to say in a way that was honest without being heavy. And then he decided that honest was enough. After Kara and I finalized everything, he said, I went through about a year where I was pretty convinced I was the problem. Not dramatically, I wasn't falling apart. I just kept running the same inventory, things I should have said sooner, nights I worked late when I didn't have to, the way I got quiet when I should have gotten present. He paused. Some of that was probably true, but at some point I realized I was taking all the available blame because it was easier than accepting that sometimes two people just don't make it, and that doesn't mean one of you has to be the villain. Did that help? Serena asked. Realizing that. Eventually, he said, it helped me stop waiting to be forgiven for something that wasn't entirely my fault. And it helped me stop being so careful all the time. What do you mean? I mean, I spent a long time after the divorce being very deliberate about everything, very managed, making sure nothing costs too much. He paused. It's exhausting, and it keeps real things out just as effectively as it keeps pain out. Serena was quiet for a moment. I do that, she said. I know, he said. I can see it. And I'm not saying it to criticize, I'm saying it because I recognize it. Does it bother you? He thought about it honestly. No, because it means you're being careful with something you think is worth protecting. I can work with that. Another silence. Not empty, the kind that has shape and warmth, the kind you get when two people are inside the same understanding without needing to name it aloud. I'm scared that I'm starting to count on you, Serena said finally. Yeah, he said. That's not a comfortable feeling. No, he agreed. But I think it might be a true one. She didn't respond immediately, but when she did, it was just a quiet exhale. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. The sound of a person setting down something they've been carrying a long time, without fully realizing the weight of it. They stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes after that, talking about nothing important. It was exactly enough. He showed up on a Tuesday with a box fan. Not announced, not orchestrated. Serena had mentioned in passing that the one in the hallway had finally given out, and Miles had stopped at the hardware store on Route 9 after his shift and texted from the parking lot. "On my way over, if that's okay." She had replied with a single word, "Yes." That was how it started going, not with declarations, with a box fan on a Tuesday. In the weeks that followed, Miles became a steady presence in the ordinary machinery of Blue Heron Lane. Not the kind that makes itself visible by doing large things, but the kind that makes itself known by doing the next small thing that needed doing, and then the one after that. He fixed the outdoor faucet that had been dripping since May, replacing the washer in 20 minutes while Nolan watched from the porch steps in silence, studying the process with the focused attention he gave most things. He came over one Saturday morning when Serena's car needed to go to the shop and drove them all to the farmer's market and then the mechanic and then back home, and nobody made anything of it. Mira warmed to him in stages, each one deliberate on her part, and Miles understood instinctively that the right response was patience, not pursuit. The first stage, she showed him the painting she'd submitted for the summer competition, watercolor coastal birds over a marsh at low tide, and watched his face carefully as he looked at it. He told her it was genuinely good, that the light on the water was the best part, and he said it the way he'd say it to anyone whose work he respected. She studied him for a moment, determining whether the compliment was real. Apparently, it was, because she closed the sketchbook and said, "Okay," and went back to what she was doing, which Miles was learning was Mira's version of acceptance. The second stage came 2 weeks later. She had 3 more paintings ready when he arrived. She spread them on the kitchen table and wanted to know which one he thought was strongest and why. He gave her an actual answer with reasons. She disagreed with part of it and told him so. He listened and reconsidered one point. She seemed satisfied. By mid-August, she had appointed him her unofficial second opinion on color choices, and she consulted him with the seriousness of someone who intended to take the feedback or leave it, depending entirely on its merit, which he respected completely. Nolan took longer, but Nolan did everything on his own timeline, and Miles had learned not to read his silence as rejection. The shift came on a Sunday afternoon. Miles was on the porch replacing a loose board, working quietly, not making a production of it. Nolan appeared at the screen door and watched for several minutes without speaking. Miles kept working, explaining under his breath what he was doing. Not for Nolan's benefit exactly, just thinking out loud. Eventually, Nolan pushed the door open and stood on the porch. "How come the boat doesn't sink?" he said. Not quite a question, more like something he'd been sitting with and had decided to release. Miles set down his hammer. "Which boat? Any boat." Miles thought about it, genuinely, not in the simplified way adults sometimes address children, but actually considering the question as asked. Then he explained buoyancy in terms of bathtubs and displaced water, and the difference between heavy and dense, and Nolan listened with the whole-body attention of a child encountering an idea that matched something he'd already been wondering about. When Miles finished, Nolan nodded once, satisfied, and went back inside. It wasn't a breakthrough in the movie sense. There was no hug, no declaration. But the next time Miles came over, Nolan was already at the door when he pulled up, and that was its own kind of language. Serena watched all of it. She watched the way he talked to her kids, not performing, not managing, just there. She watched the way he made no account of what he'd contributed, kept no running total that required acknowledgement. She watched him show up on the hard days too. The Tuesday Mira had a meltdown over a homework assignment, and the whole house ran hot with it. The evening Nolan woke from a nightmare and wouldn't settle. And Serena was running on 4 hours of sleep, and Miles sat with her on the porch at 10 o'clock, while she drank tea and didn't try to fix anything. Just stayed. She stopped calling him a friend from work sometime in early August. She didn't announce it, she just stopped saying it, and nobody asked her to clarify. The armor came off in pieces rather than all at once, which was the only way it could have. She stopped steeling herself for the conversation where he'd tell her this was too much. She stopped cataloging reasons he might leave. Not because she'd decided to be reckless, but because the evidence had accumulated past the point where fear could dismiss it. He had stayed, and each time he'd done it without making her feel like it cost him something. The last Sunday of August was warm but not punishing, the particular quality of late summer light that is somehow both bright and soft, the season beginning to ease its grip without announcing it. Serena packed a cooler with sandwiches and fruit and drove the kids to the harbor beach, and Miles met them there. They spread 2 blankets on the sand above the tide line. Mira immediately took her shoes off and walked down to the water, sketchbook under her arm. Nolan applied himself to the serious project of digging a hole, which he had explained on the drive over would be very big. Serena and Miles sat on the blankets and watched them. The water was green and flat, the sky enormous and pale blue. A pelican moving in a long, low glide above the surface. The afternoon had the unhurried quality of something that doesn't need to become anything else. After a while, Serena leaned over and rested her head on Miles's shoulder. Not a grand gesture, something quieter than that. The gesture of a person who has finally decided to stop holding herself apart. Miles didn't move. He stayed exactly where he was. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. She watched Nolan deposit a careful scoop of sand and assess his progress with great seriousness. "Yeah," she said. "For the first time in a long time, actually, yeah." Miles looked out at the water. He thought briefly of a restaurant table and a woman setting down her glass and saying, "You can leave," in a voice that had learned to make the offer before the hurt could arrive. He thought of everything between that night and this afternoon, the boardwalk, the kitchen, the phone call on the dark porch, a 5-year-old asking about boats. He thought, this is what staying looks like. Not a declaration, not an arrival, just 2 people on a blanket in the late August sun, watching their kids at the water's edge, neither of them going anywhere. The pelican banked slowly and disappeared beyond the point. The afternoon held. Sometimes love doesn't start with a confession. It starts with the door left open and someone who chooses to walk through it anyway. Not because the timing is perfect, not because the path is easy, but because some people are worth the real version of things, the messy kitchen, the tired eyes, the kids who need time to trust, and all the ordinary Tuesdays in between. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one waiting to be left, or the one who chose to stay, this channel is for you. Subscribe, and we'll keep telling the stories that matter.